I teach science at a community college, and for years I taught a course called Introduction to Biology. It's a course that most students around the country take to fulfill their gen ed science requirements. These are students who don't want to be scientists when they grow up, but they have to have science. And this particular semester, I was teaching the stages of mitosis. I was applying it to cancer. I was really trying to make it useful to students, but I looked out of the classroom and they were bored, or they were scared, or honestly, a little bit of both. I knew they were because they had to be there. They didn't want to be. Like most science classes, and definitely most intro bio courses, there's an introductory chapter on the scientific method. It's an oversimplified recipe-like version of science that's definitely not accurate the vast majority of the time. And then there's a whole textbook full of facts that students have to memorize, which they do, regurgitate on an exam, and promptly forget. And I wondered, is this what students need to know? This class is probably the last science education students are ever going to get in their whole life. So am I equipping them for a life in a science-based world? I don't think I was. And honestly, now I feel like I failed them. So in its place, I designed a course to teach skills, not facts. And those skills are critical thinking, information literacy, and science literacy. Basically, I want to empower students to be able to make better decisions instead of teaching them facts they have to memorize. And in this class, I use 3 teaching techniques. So the first one is directly using pseudoscience and denial in class. Students bring these misconceptions with them into class. I get to address them head on, and it's honestly fun. But in addition, students can compare knowledge gained through the process of science versus those that look like science, but that are not as reliable. So they learn about science through pseudoscience. I also provide a structured toolkit. I call it Floater. The idea is that I give them tools to be able to evaluate claims and lots of opportunities to practice throughout the semester. And the other thing that I do, which is the focus of this talk, is use inoculation theory, or inoculating them against misinformation. We're drowning in pseudoscience, science denial, misinformation, conspiracy theories, irrational beliefs, and honestly, that was before the pandemic. The spread of misinformation has reached such epidemic proportions that the World Health Organization is calling it an infodemic. Here's the problem. Reliable information is essential for making wise decisions. So how do we figure out what's true? The goal here is to teach students how to be good consumers of information. So I could try to debunk every false claim, but that feels a bit like a game of whack-a-mole. There's always going to be another false claim that pops up. So the solution is inoculation theory. Similar to how a vaccine builds immunity to a pathogen by exposing our bodies to a weakened form of that pathogen, we can build immunity to misinformation by exposing our minds to a weakened form of misinformation. Basically, inoculation trains our mental immune system to identify and therefore not fall for misinformation. This is an application of the work by first William McGuire, who proposed inoculation theory in the 60s. And today's researchers like John Cook, Sandra van der Linden, John Rosenbeek, Josh Compton, Stephen Lewandowski are publishing excellent studies on the effectiveness of inoculation. There are different types of inoculation. This table is from a study that's in review that is attempting to firm up some definitions and proposing new types of inoculation. This would be John Cook and myself. We've designed what we call a bingo card of inoculation to help educators create inoculation exercises. So a few things here, because we're going to talk about this more later. There's different methods. Fact-based explains how misinformation is false with factual explanations. Technique-based explains the techniques used to mislead. So logic-based inoculation is a type of technique-based that focuses on fallacies. And then there's source-based, which is focusing on the reliability of the source. The delivery mechanism can be a one-way passive flow. It can be active, in which case students themselves are generating the misinformation. More on that later. And then experiential. This is the new type we're proposing. Also, the order can be pre-bunking or debunking. So before exposure to misinformation or afterwards. A few things here. Humorous tends to work more than non-humorous. Humor makes the medicine go down. Technique-based outperforms fact-based because it's generalizable. It provides resistance against the same misinformation technique in different topics. So what I'm going to do is talk about the different types of inoculation activities that I use in my class. I start class with a free personality assessment. I tell my students I have a friend who's a well-known astrologer, and she has agreed to provide students with free personality assessments to test her effectiveness. I have students fill out a brief questionnaire. It turns out I'm a really good liar when I want to be. So I set up this whole ruse, and then I give students their personality assessments the next class. I have them rate her accuracy on a scale of 1 to 5. Over the semesters, it's averaged out to about 4.2 to 4.5 out of 5. Basically, the students think that she is very accurate. And then I have them talk with other students in class about their personality assessments, and they discover they all got the same one. So the personality assessment is effective because of what are known as Barnum statements or Forer statements. The original psychologist who did this work was Bertram Forer. And this exercise has been done in psychology classes in the many decades since then, and James Randi famously did it, etc. The reason this works, though, is that these are vague statements that we think apply to us uniquely, but are actually applicable to most people. I mean, if you read those statements, they apply to all of us, but we think, wow, that's really me. So we're proposing this as a type of experiential inoculation, in that the students are learning the misinformation techniques by actually being misled. The goal here is to convince students that they can be fooled, right? The famous Feynman quote, the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. If I just told students I could fool them, they wouldn't necessarily believe me. So this way I get to demonstrate the importance of skepticism and intellectual humility, and also teach them these misinformation techniques that are very common in psychic readings and astrology readings, etc. Importantly, handling fooling students is essential to do it the right way. So make it a safe environment. Don't call anybody stupid for falling for this. It's funny. So what I tend to do is, tell students, I'm so sorry I lied to you, but at least I did it for free and for educational purposes. And then I'll tell them that won't promise that I won't do it again, right? Don't necessarily just trust me. So I make light of it. And since the vast majority of students fall for it, I've never noticed students really taking this personally. And then there's active inoculation. And this is where students create misinformation to learn the techniques. Basically, teaching students how the wizard does his tricks so that they learn that the wizard isn't magic. The idea here is for them to be able to spot the techniques in the real world. So what I'm going to do is talk about various active inoculation activities from class. The first one is the game Cranky Uncle by John Cook. And Cranky Uncle is one of the great online games at teaching students misinformation techniques. You know who Cranky Uncle is, right? It's the guy at Thanksgiving who denies climate change that makes everybody's Thanksgiving a little bit worse off because everybody's fighting about this. The idea here is Cranky Uncle is using science denial techniques summarized by the acronym FLIC. Fake experts, logical fallacies, impossible expectations, cherry picking, and conspiracy theories. And in the game, you learn how to recognize the techniques that Cranky Uncle is using. In this example, it's cold outside, therefore global warming doesn't exist, is like saying the sun doesn't exist because it's dark. It's a great example of the use of an anecdotal argument, which is a logical fallacy. Now, this also uses what's known as parallel argumentation. So it takes the flawed logic and then replaces it with something else, in this case, something that's funny, so that you can see how absurd that argument actually is. This is an effective technique because you don't have to explain the science behind climate change. You can just see that this argument is wrong by using parallel argumentation. I had a student who said in review that they love this game because it teaches you how to outsmart boomers. It's fun, students enjoy this, and they get to be cranky and level up as they learn the techniques and get crankier. This game here, Bad News from John Rosenbeek and Sander van der Linden. Players take on the role of a fake news producer. The goal is to build a fake news empire and gain as many followers as possible while maintaining a veneer of credibility. They, throughout the game, earn badges for common misinformation techniques. You can see the badges there on the right. Players learn to recognize the techniques in bad news, and in the process, it inoculates them from real-world bad news. At the end of one semester, after teaching students how to think critically, students were sending me emails, as they do, telling me why they shouldn't fail the class, and I thought, this is really ironic. I just taught you about logical fallacies, and here you are writing me emails full of them. So I had an idea. Why don't I have students create those emails earlier in the semester? This assignment is exactly that. Students write an email to the professor arguing why they should pass the class, even though they didn't use the work using logical fallacies they learned from class. So this example here is a real email from the assignment, and it's published in the Cook study cited here. So this student says, skipping, the reason my grades have been slipping is because my uncle's friend's kid's dog just had babies and one of them got hit by a car and now I'm depressed. Okay, there's a nice appeal to emotion. Other than that, if you fail me, I'm not going to get into graduate school and then I'll never be able to get my doctorate and then more people will die, right? If you fail me in this class, people will die and it will be your fault. So there's a nice slippery slope. Yeah, I didn't do any of my homework, but there are homeless people, literally homeless people everywhere. You should be focusing on that. So that's a nice red herring. I even asked my mom and dad, and they agreed that it's not fair. So there's a nice appeal to authority. Students also like ad hominems. They attack my character. They tend to write me a little apology notes at the bottom saying I would never write professors these emails, which is great. What I find here is that, again, students think this is fun. This is something they can relate to, and they get to actually create illogical arguments for something that they would probably care about. And in the process, they get to see it. The rest of the assignment is, this goes into a discussion board. Other students read them and then have to identify the fallacies in the arguments. Okay. In my debrief, these are always important for active inoculation, I generally thank the students if they make me laugh, which a lot of them do. I tell them not to send these emails to other professors. But the point is that they can learn now that these fallacies can be powerful tools in argumentation and not to use them. In the sake of time, I'm going to skip a lot of this, but I also teach students how to cold read, like psychics do. And then I have them evaluate real psychics. So I go through various cold reading techniques. I teach them how to spot them. I teach them how to do them themselves. And then when they evaluate John Edwards or any TV psychics, I had a student say, once you see these techniques, you can't unsee them, right? And that's the point. So conspiracy theories are important to address in class. Critical thinking can inoculate against conspiracies. Unfortunately, conspiracy theorists often think they're the real critical thinkers who know the truth, right? Unlike the sheeple who need to wake up and think for themselves and do their own research. Ironically, and unfortunately, this immunizes believers against actual critical thinking. In this assignment, what I have students do is make conspiracy theories. And I'm going to use Birds Aren't Real as an introduction because this is how I do this in class. This conspiracy theory is amazing. It's a satirical conspiracy theory created by Peter McIndoe in 2017 and essentially states that all birds in the United States were exterminated by the government in the 60s and were replaced with drones to spy on citizens. They recharge on power lines and they track you by pooping on cars, right? It gets really elaborate. I teach students the characteristics of conspiracy theories. Right? They're unfalsifiable or immune to evidence. They have heightened patternicity and agency detection. They use motivated reasoning, cherry picking, confirmation bias, etc. So I teach students about this conspiracy theory and characteristics of conspiracy theories, and then I have them create and defend a conspiracy theory. So invent a wild conspiracy theory. Tell me who the conspirators are. Was it the government, industry, celebrities, aliens? What do they do? Why did they do it? Is it power? Is it money? What is their motivation? And then what is the evidence? They have to create a compelling narrative. Go online, find at least 3 pieces of evidence that can support your conspiracy. And students are so funny because they'll be working and then go, Professor, do we need to use Reliable sources. No, conspiracy uses reliable sources. Go to a subreddit or a YouTube video, it doesn't matter. Okay, they then present their conspiracy to other students, and the other students have to try and disprove the conspiracy. But the person who created the conspiracy, their job is to not change their mind. Always turn evidence and questions around so that it supports your conspiracy. Is there missing evidence? Oh, it was covered up. Is there evidence that would disprove your conspiracy theory? It was planted. So in this way, students get to practice maintaining a conspiracy in the face of reality, which is exactly what conspiracy theories do. This is super fun. The students enjoy doing this. And in the process, they learn about the characteristics of conspiracy theories so that they can see them in the real world. The last active inoculation activity I'm going to talk about is how to sell pseudoscience. So in class, I teach students characteristics of pseudoscience and then the techniques used to sell pseudoscience, which I published in a Skeptical Inquirer article this year. I show them this graphic, which is something that I made to demonstrate many of those characteristics. I am running out of time, so I don't have time to point them out. I will say that I've had people ask me to buy this, even though I don't actually sell anything here. So these techniques are really effective. I would encourage you to go to the article and see how many you can find. I'm going to show you quickly a few of the student examples here. So we've got a quick gem. I mean, this uses many of the characteristics, things like appealing to nature and tradition, having some sort of appeal to authority with like a certification or a doctor. There is always anecdotal evidence. This is what it worked for me. Make extraordinary claims, simple solutions, really good example here. Now, I teach college students, so I let my college students do other kinds of pseudoscience. In this case, the guys in particular tend to want to do penis enlargement or male performance. So I'm just going to let you look at this and move on. I always tell students that I'm grateful if they made me laugh. Now, this has also been done in Bertha Vasquez's middle school science class. And here's an example that they came up with, which I love. Apparently the students wanted to also do the male enhancement, and she told them no. Nevertheless, they managed to sneak in Dr. Sins. If you don't know who that is, congrats. Maybe look it up if you want to know. The before and after picture is absolutely hysterical, but they've nailed it with so many of the characteristics. Students tend to be creative with this. They love doing it. It's super fun. And again, students tell me, once I see those techniques, I can't unsee them, which is the point. I always debrief students here. The goal is to learn the techniques used to mislead. It is not to mislead others. So I tell them, use your powers for good. I remind them at the beginning of the semester how it felt when I fooled them and say, would you like it if someone else used these techniques on you? I'm trying to empower them to be able to spot BS and avoid being fooled and taken advantage of. Active inoculation exercises are a great way to do. There is a lot of misinformation out there, and we need to inoculate minds against the techniques used to mislead. A few other pointers here. I think it's good practice to start with misinformation that's not triggering. Don't go in with emotionally or identity loaded topics, things like climate change denial or vaccines, etc. This allows students to practice thinking through misinformation and spot the techniques without being triggered, and then slowly expand to those more important identity issues. There are endless possibilities here. When creating activities, that bingo card is hopefully useful. I start with what is the misinformation? How is that created? And then assign students that process. We're basically limited only by our imagination. For example, teach students how to bend spoons. If you want to show students what ghost photos might be, how they might be faked, show them how to fake ghost photos. Have them create fake ghost photos. This is fun and it's empowering for students. Most of the lessons and assignments that I talked about in this lecture are on my website, Thinking is Power. Feel free to contact me. Special thanks to John Cook, Andy Norman, and most importantly, the Center for Inquiry and the Skeptic Community. This was my first CSICon, and I love the community there. I have been so welcomed, and the people are so inspiring. So thank you very much for your time.